Anna Adlerstein and Emily Saunders are both human rights advocates who assist migrants who have reached the U.S. Mexican border. Anna is also an independent journalist and Emily is a psychotherapist. Both have experienced the Trump administration's intimidation campaign against border humanitarians firsthand. Now, Anna was recently arrested by Border Patrol at an Arizona Port of Entry for observing a migrant asking for asylum. Emily's partner, Scott Warren, just had a felony trial that ended in a mistrial. Scott is a volunteer with No More Deaths and was facing up to 20 years in prison for assisting migrants by giving them food, water, and clothing. On July 2nd, prosecutors will announce whether they will retry his case. Anna and Emily are with me today to discuss what they have seen and gone through at the U.S. southern border. Thank you for joining me today. You both served as advocates for asylum seekers at the Mexican-American border in Arizona. Can you tell me about the area that you've been recently working in and what's going on there?
We've been working in the area around Ajo, Arizona. Ajo is a small town about 40 miles north of the closest port of entry into Mexico, which is the Sonoita Lukeville Port of Entry. And it's a very, very remote area of the desert where since 1994, migrants and refugees and asylum seekers have been funneled into this most remote region. And then as they arrive to the border, are faced with choices about if and how they want to gain access into the United States.
What do you mean by funneled?
So the U.S. has been enforcing the border under a policy known as prevention through deterrence since about 1994 under the Clinton administration.
Now, if somebody wanted to go to that border crossing and apply for asylum, what would happen today?
Well, every day is a new day. I can tell you what should happen, and I can tell you what has been happening. They should be able to present their asylum claim and share with the officers there that they have fear of returning to their country and be processed for asylum. What has in fact been happening is we've been seeing people being turned away, oftentimes with physical violence, or given all kinds of excuses as to why they can't present. I'm yet to hear any accounts of anyone who's just walked up to the port of entry and been able to present for asylum simply.
What kind of violence have you seen if somebody presents themselves for asylum at a border crossing?
People being physically shoved out of the port, oftentimes shoved and told that they can't apply for asylum there, so shoved and turned away. I think the most extreme example of violence that Emily and I have witnessed was where a group of 8 kids and 8 adults were rushed at by officers with guns, pushed to the ground. Children were torn out of parents' arms. We actually witnessed one CPB agent have a toddler in their hands and sprint at the gate and close the gate to stop traffic.
When you witnessed this particular incident, were the migrants doing anything, something that would threaten somebody or make somebody scared?
So this is a family, 8 adults, many of them holding toddlers, walked straight into the port of entry through the vehicle pathway, which is the only way for a pedestrian to enter, and appeared to be somewhat confused about where to go next and trying to assert their reason for being present, continue to walk forward into where the vehicles normally would cross through. For them to enter through the pedestrian entry, which is what CBP may have wanted to see, they would have had to walk towards CBP agents that were rushing them and yelling at them. There was nothing this family did that was illegal or wrong in any way.
So in essence, they were confused where they were walking. And what you're saying is that the force that was used against them, ripping babies out of their hand, throwing them on the ground, tasers to their head, was not proportional to, I'm walking in the wrong direction to apply for asylum.
It appeared to me as an observer that the CBP agents were confused, shocked, overwhelmed, and very afraid for reasons that I didn't understand.
What does the typical person understand the asylum process to be?
I think that really varies. We see groups who come with manila folders full of evidence that they've gathered from their home country, who have studied asylum law and really understand what it is that they're getting into. And we see other folks who assume that the only way to cross the border is on foot without any legal support. But when you start talking about asylum, they immediately share that, oh, well, they're fleeing for their lives because of their political beliefs. And so in that instance, having information about groups that would qualify you to apply for asylum can be really helpful.
This migrant shelter, migrants who need help and assistance, this is on the Mexican side of the border, or they've already made it into America and they don't know where to go?
The shelter is in Sonoita, so on the Mexican side of the border. Quite a journey to get there. They're at the shelter since I've been volunteering there. Folks mostly from Central America and Mexico. I don't know if I've met really anyone who hasn't ridden La Bestia, that infamous train, at some point to get there. Almost everyone has dealt with a lot of harrowing trauma.
How often do you go across the border to Mexico? And when you come back, does Border Patrol know who you are? What are they saying to you when you come back across the border?
There had been a period where I've been traveling down to Sonoita about twice a week, and they didn't know who we were really until we observed that large Garifuna family where that police brutality occurred.
Now tell me, when did this happen, and tell me what happened?
It was early March. It was 4 of us that were legal observers who watched this excessive use of force go down. So this family, like any other family, had a choice to make about whether they wanted to enter the United States and how. We never tell anyone how to do it. Again, we don't give legal advice either because we're not lawyers, but they had decided autonomously that they needed to enter. They also were fearing for their lives and felt that they needed to do it that day. This particular family was equipped with the paperwork needed to be able to show to authorities their relationships to each other as family members, etc., and they were ready to present. And so what we did was stand about 10 to 20 feet behind them as they walked slowly into the port of entry. And that's when the situation unfolded that we told you about. After about 5 minutes of watching this brutal use of force, we were told we needed to either step back into Mexico or enter through the United States. They closed the port of entry. We appealed to the CBP agents to show compassion, which may have further escalated the unfolding. And later that day, re-entered the United States to go home.
Did anybody ever tell you you're under arrest for smuggling?
Not that day. But that was the first day we were pulled into secondary.
Yeah. Now, there was a point when you're doing all of this that I understand you got arrested. Tell me about what happened.
I was accompanying an individual whose attorney has asked that I not share any details about them, and I'll call them Renee. And this individual had, a few days prior, tried to present for asylum, and as we described, is typical and physically pushed out of court. So Renee's lawyer calls in advance to alert the port that Renee is going to present. So the port is expecting Renee. So Renee walks up to the port of entry and is met by an officer who I know from previous incidents. I'm so concerned about the impact of my presence that I'm standing far enough away so that I can see that they can't see me. I watched for about 10 minutes, and Renee and Officer Noriega are still talking, and it doesn't seem like there's any progress being made. So at that point I approach and I ask Officer Noriega what's happening, and the supervisor rushing out of the port says, okay, one and an illegal alien smuggler. And I'm a little confused. Mm-hmm. And he keeps rushing out and comes to me and he says, you don't know the law. You're smuggling illegal aliens. I could arrest you for that.
What was the logic behind that you're an alien smuggler?
At that point, all I knew is that there's an angry Customs and Border Patrol officer who's calling me an illegal alien smuggler and telling me that I could be arrested, that I will be arrested. A few steps towards the office, I asked if I'm under arrest, and he says yes. But it wasn't clear to me why accompanying an asylum seeker whose lawyer has called in advance to a port of entry, why that was considered illegal alien smuggling.
Did you get put handcuffs? Were you put in a jail cell?
I was put in a jail cell. As we're walking into the port of entry, since this intimidation that Emily described to you with the Garifuna family, we've since been in touch with the ACLU. Both of us carry a letter from the ACLU every time we cross through the port that essentially says our client won't answer questions beyond to assert their citizenship. At this point, I hand the supervisor my letter from the ACLU and I say, I'm going to plead the fifth and I would like to speak to a lawyer. And the supervisor takes my letter, and at this point we're inside the office, and he throws it on the desk and he says, you can tell your lawyer to come down here and we'll arrest him too. And then he puts me in a jail cell. But ultimately they let me out after about 4 hours.
Were you scared at all?
Yeah, I was scared. They wouldn't let me speak to a lawyer. I demanded to speak to a lawyer over 10 times, and they would not allow that. They said that they wouldn't let me speak with a lawyer until there were charges, that there weren't charges, but there was an ongoing investigation, and that I was being accused of Statute 1324. I was definitely scared.
Have you had to go to court? What's happened since?
So far, no charges. They said that HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, would be following up. I did get a call from an individual from HSI who I directed my lawyer to, and they've since talked, and we haven't heard anything from him since.
It sounds like more intimidation than anything else, and probably illegal detention of an American citizen.
Beyond clearly intimidation, they kept saying phrases like the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply here when I would ask to speak to a lawyer.
If somebody goes through all of the extraordinary steps that Renee took to seek asylum, and the result of that is the person accompanying them gets arrested, how the hell are you supposed to seek asylum?
Right.
The only bright side of the story is that Renee was processed that day.
Good.
So Renee is now in detention. So that's not really a bright side, but at least they're not fearing for their life in Mexico. Now they're just dealing with the inhumane conditions in a private detention center.
Now, Emily, you have worked with No More Deaths, the same organization that Scott Warren is associated with. Now, Scott was on trial in Arizona, facing 20 years for alien smuggling because he was providing humanitarian aid to migrants in a different way in which the two of you are, but similar humanitarian aid. Now, the trial ended in a deadlock verdict. What is the solution here?
I think that's a question we need to turn back towards Border Patrol, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, ICE, DHS, and the United States government. As border residents living here in homes, in neighborhoods, and going to churches where on any given day we can expect a migrant to knock on the door and plead for life-saving humanitarian assistance, our solution is to search our conscience and act in the moment according to our deepest values, according to our deepest beliefs about what a healthy society looks like. It's compassion and kindness. And we're being asked to do that in a culture where that work is increasingly criminalized. We are here witnessing something unprecedented and, yes, very scary, that has huge implications about the future of our country.
Tell me what the American dream means to you, and tell me if it's changed since you've been doing this work on the ground there.
It's a great question. I think that my understanding of the American dream is that we're creating something together that has to do with mutual support and healing across a lot of generational trauma, and that we have to do it interdependently.
And Anna, what do you think?
Even though I've done other advocacy work, I've seen lots of abuses of power, but I think something about having grown up white in Maine, I have a lot of assumptions that I'm reckoning with around the state. To be sitting in that jail cell and going over the events in my head again and again. So I think being at the border and living just a thimbleful of the amount of corruption and injustice that I think a lot of folks in this country who aren't afforded being born into documents and, white skin and a comfortable upbringing, I think I really just started to glimpse what that might feel like. People just need basic human rights.
When you see what goes on at the border and people want to follow the rules and there's no rules to follow, and how inhumane we are to a fellow human being, you say, that ideal of the American dream is maybe an ideal, but it's really not reality. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Anna, Adlerstein, Emily Saunders, I appreciate your time. You're helping your fellow human beings, and I congratulate you and I cheer you on. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Brad. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. For more Bradshaw Live, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.